Started. All right, thank you for joining our part two of our ELA learning series for teachers. And this one is going to focus on instruction. And our objectives for our session today are grounded in our larger department priorities and goals. And we know that all students can succeed when they're provided with opportunities to learn. And our priorities are rooted in this knowledge. The statewide teaching and learning strategy addresses meeting the individual needs of all of our students, including our diverse learners, by building capacity of our leaders to drive impactful practices, providing effective core instruction, utilizing high quality instructional materials, ensuring strategic use of instructional time, providing access to high dosage tutoring that supports students by meeting their individual needs, providing access to courses and credentials that prepare students, and providing quality and timely job-embedded, content-focused professional learning. Our ELA goal in Louisiana is for all of our students to read, understand, and express their understanding of complex grade level text. Everything that we do in ELA is centered on those texts. So this session is going to support teachers in analyzing how to make intentional instructional decisions in order to support their individual students' needs. Oh, went too far. So our agenda today, we're going to look at the power of pedagogy and then look at the lesson study protocol, which is building on our first session that was focused on the unit study protocol. Today, we're going to begin with the power of pedagogy. Learn which teacher moves are most impactful when we're delivering our content and why they are especially important to our diverse learners. Let's take a look at this quote on the screen. I have come to believe that a great teacher is a great artist and that teaching might even be the greatest of the arts since the medium is the human mind and spirit. Think about your unique group of students and the knowledge and skills that they need for their futures, whether it's the next grade level or as they continue on and become contributing members to our society as adults. So always begin with the end in mind. This isn't anything new. We always talk about this, but we need to consider how can we make our learning goals come alive for our students. 3 ways to begin doing this are state, investigate, and relate. We want to always call out the goals explicitly, ensure our students understand the vocabulary and the intention of the goals. This could also mean introducing success criteria for how they will meet those goals and explain how the daily goal relates to the past and future knowledge, as well as the overall unit goals and the essential question. And remember that with our diverse learners, they're going to struggle with multiple steps being given at once. The moment they start to feel overwhelmed because they don't understand the language, or there's too many steps, or they're starting to feel lost, they will shut down and possibly act out. Breaking this down and checking for understanding will change the learning environment for those struggling students. So we want to explicitly teach our students they need to move to independence. That's not something that just happens overnight. It takes time, it takes focus, and it takes practice. We shouldn't assume that students will pick up on these skills or acquire the necessary knowledge they need by chance. Direct instruction occurs when we use pedagogical moves like those suggested by researchers um, such as Anita Archer or Charles Hughes. in the book Explicit Instruction. Techniques such as modeling, so we're working examples with metacognition and sharing examples and non-examples, explicit vocabulary protocols when teaching new words to students and teaching students how to be actively engaged during instruction. I know we can all consider those students that we need to teach the slant protocol to, and they might need a reminder as the year goes on. There are a couple of resources that we have available to show what explicit instruction, explicit vocabulary instruction looks like in a second grade classroom. And then also a video that has an explanation of slant and how it's like put into practice with seventh graders. I'm going to grab these links and I will put them in the chat for you. So that's the explicit vocabulary protocol in the second grade classroom. And then this is the slant explanation and practice with middle schoolers, which we know our middle schoolers are always a special group of kids. Love my middle school babies. So again, direct instruction, it's as much about the student's behavior while learning as it is about the teacher's actions while teaching. Using strategies such as choral reading and partner responses during direct instruction, it guarantees lessons where everyone is doing everything all the time. Anita Archer was here in Baton Rouge a couple of months ago, and we had the opportunity to go listen to her speak. And throughout her whole presentation, she was using these strategies with us where it was most appropriate. So she was modeling that for us right there live, and it was so impactful, and you could just see how that would help in the classroom. So for choral group responses, you want to use those when the answers are short and the wording of the answer is the same no matter what. And then the procedure, you'll want to signal a response from your students by asking a question, raising your hand, giving think time, and then lower your hand and say everyone to cue a response from everyone. So that would look like a question such as what color is the sky today? This is not a text example, but just what this could look like. I want everybody to think, what color is the sky today? Let's think, everyone, and then everyone would respond. And then partner responses, you can use those when the answers are long or the wording might be different across students. And so this would be something where, I could think of like what evidence is supporting X in the text, or if students are rationalizing how a character has changed over the course of the text. This would be something, there could be a lot of different changes that happen. And so it's a longer response, and this would be more appropriate for a partner. So for this procedure, the teacher would assign partners with the numbers 1 and 2. And then the teacher checks to be sure that students remember their numbers, and then gave them a strategy when sharing answers. So it might be the look, lean, and whisper, or whatever strategy works in your classroom. You could do that. We have a video of Anita Archer actually giving us an example of this, modeling this for us. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. It's a longer link there, so I do apologize about that. All right. So we now know that direct instruction, it's really only as good as the level of engagement students have while the instruction is happening. Again, we want to ensure that our students are active, not passive, even when we're leading the learning. they still need to be active learners. Giving students additional resources to stay focused while they're learning those new skills or new content is so important. So, some examples of how to facilitate active learning include requiring note taking, frequent questioning to help students recall information, graphic organizers that organize their learning or relate the information to things they've already learned. So, how does this fit into what I'm already learning? And whether you're a new teacher or an experienced teacher, we are always lead learners and we're always wanting to kind of build our toolbox of resources that we can use in our classroom. So it's always a good opportunity to kind of revisit these and see what additional practices you could add to your toolbox. So various types of discussions, pair, small group, whole class, should be included in all high quality instructional materials. So it doesn't matter what curriculum you're using. All of our high quality instructional materials are going to include various types of discussion, small groups, pairs, whole class. Capitalize on that. Those discussions can be super impactful and can provide opportunities for diverse learners to gain confidence, as well as the teacher in the room to measure what the students already know. This is where being intentional with your grouping can make all the difference. You want to have students begin their conversations possibly as a pair, and then they move to a small group, so the pairs will join another pair and then come together as a whole class, and that gives the students the opportunities to practice before sharing their ideas in front of the whole class. And when you're being intentional about your grouping, you'll want to know, sometimes in our classrooms we may have those students that they're wonderful helpers to their peers. Sometimes we might have some that kind of take over the conversation, and so we would want to avoid putting that type of a student that really would kind of lean to take over a conversation. We wouldn't necessarily want to put that student with a student who is struggling significantly in the class. Um, that could create the opportunity for the one student to just take over and the other student to um, not be able to participate, and they're not really going to get what they should get out of that experience. So just being very intentional whenever you're creating those groups. So teachers are prompted to purposely pair the students in various grouping, whether it's homogeneous or heterogeneous grouping, based on the task outcomes and possible supports. So you'll see some suggestions in your curriculum at times, but then a lot of times it's going to be just based on what the teacher it feels like or knows is appropriate for their group of students at that time. When students are learning English as a new language and they're paired in a homogeneous pairing, they should be encouraged to collaborate in their home language as they work to complete their products in English. As their English develops, then we want to pull back on that support, but we don't want to you know, essentially shut off students' access to being able to participate in an activity because there is a language barrier. So you just want to be sure that, students need to be explicitly taught how to collaborate and be given resources such as accountability tools or conversation stems in order to have the confidence to share what they know in a discussion. We have an annotated lesson plan here. I want to take a moment for us to look at. Let me get this pulled up here. Make it a little bigger for us here. All right, so this is, and I would say that this would be an exemplar of an annotated lesson. However, I'm not saying that your annotations need to look exactly like this because your annotations are very specific to your population of students in your classroom. But let's look at what some things are happening in here. We see that the teacher has identified, the section overview, and they've identified some specific language that is going to come up again. So it's important that they kind of are focusing on that. And then the section assessment, they've identified what that assessment is. That kind of helps them as they're going through section 3 in this unit. It helps them keep that focus in mind and recall, remind students of what that learning is. The teacher has also identified the knowledge look for and the skill look for. She's even gone through and she's identified the standard that aligns to what part of this activity. And of course, there's more than one standard there, but she wanted to be very explicit in calling out one of these standards. So in here, the teacher actually made some modifications to this activity because based on her group of students, she needed to kind of give a little bit of pre-learning before they dove into this text a little bit deeper in this lesson today. So she switched up the lesson a little bit. Here we see that the right here, this is the student part. Says they're going to read this text with their partner and take turns reading with their partner, reading a paragraph aloud at a time. So the teachers identified that her students are going to sit in small groups to engage in reading of that text. Their first task after being given instructions for this lesson today is going to be the fluency protocol. And she has some small group roles identified already because she knows her students. And I was actually there to observe this lesson, and she knew her students, and that was very clear in her grouping. So she was just super, super intentional with that. And as a teacher, are we going to always get it right the first time? No, but that's okay. We learn from that and make adjustments. So the teacher talks about what's going to happen there. Um, she provides a model summary statement. That's one of the things that are in the teacher notes that, model writing a summary statement for the first paragraph. So she modeled this for her students, but before she did this in the class, she developed that summary statement there. And I want to look at her grouping here. And these were some notes that she would normally make for her anybody that's coming in from the outside. Like her principal probably knows these students, but someone else might not know these students. So she grouped her students together. You can see the colors that she used here. And then she had us, it was 3 of us there visiting, and we each had our groups. And she just made some information here where she did a jigsaw activity with the students. We can see that she kind of varied the parts of the text that the students were going to read based off their group's makeup. And this was just a decision that it was the right decision to make for this text in this group of students. So it's definitely something that comes as a teacher grows and develops their skills, but it's definitely a model to work towards. So 2 other pedagogical moves that are important for engaging students in the learning process is exposing students to the knowledge and skills they need multiple times, and then having them apply their knowledge to provide feedback on how they're progressing toward the learning goal. What's important to remember is that exposing students to the content and skills and also assessing their learning in multiple ways is going to give all students the best opportunity to learn and show what they know. Various methods for these teacher moves include the use of fluency activities, multiple reads, graphic organizers, such as like understanding tools, vocabulary tools, or reading closely tools, different levels of questioning. So having some scaffolding questions, or having, students being very intentional with the questions that you ask particular groups, like we saw in that example, and turn and talks, formal class discussions, or quick writes. These can all provide multiple exposures to knowledge and skills, as well as act as formative assessments, and then finally, summative assessments. And it's important to hold our students accountable for using their learned skills in their work. We're not just doing this to do it, it's for a purpose. And it's important that we hold our students accountable for that. This is why high quality instructional materials for ELA focus on central ideas and keep coming back to them over and over again. So here we can see examples of how the section diagnostics assessments in the Esperanza Rising ELA guidebooks unit give students multiple opportunities to exhibit their knowledge of the novel and their ability to utilize narrative techniques they study in each lesson. All of the unit activities and assessments are connected, providing the instructional coherence needed for students to acquire the knowledge and skills in a deep and lasting way. And this is just an example from ELA guidebooks, but whatever curriculum you're using, if you're using any of the high quality instructional materials that have been reviewed and considered to be tier one for ELA, you're going to see this kind of learning progression present in your materials as well. All of our learners need feedback to grow. We need to remember that we can gather data to provide feedback using more than just the traditional test. While students are applying their learning in class, teachers should be rotating around and taking notes on their work, tracking their verbal responses on a spreadsheet maybe, and giving students in the moment feedback as much as possible. I saw a beautiful example of this happening in a classroom, and I didn't know it at the time, but the teacher that was doing this was walking around, and she had her clipboard and she was making some notes as she visited each group. And I would see her ask particular questions to groups. It wasn't the same question she was asking over and over, but you could see that she was very intentional about her questioning. And I found out that that was a student teacher, and I was just so excited. I was like, yes, we have a wonderful practice already built in this student teacher. So, going around and getting that data it's a very important data point to have for your students. So once the data is collected from your formative and summative assessments, the next best practice is not to just grade their work. The point of the work is to see how our students are moving toward the goals of the course. For assessments to be meaningful, they require us to analyze them and provide structured feedback. However, in order for feedback to work, we need to keep a few things in mind. Feedback needs to be specific, timely, respectful, and economical. Educators need to consider the amount of information the receiver can receive rather than the amount that we want to give as teachers. We know ourselves, and we know that we want to take those writing responses that our students give us, and we want to, provide them all the feedback, fix all the things, show our students how to fix all the things. But what happens when we do that is we give our students back this piece of work that they worked really hard on, and it's just all marked up with our beautiful Flair pens. But we're giving students information overload. And overloading an individual with feedback, it really reduces the likelihood that the information will be used effectively. This is why our feedback tools, such as the rubrics that we see here, can give teachers, can support teachers in giving feedback that is more powerful in impacting student growth. So we don't want to grade for all the things. We want to look at, here, these are the writing look fors in a section diagnostic checklist in ELA guidebooks. So you'll have your writing look fors and then you'll have your reading look fors. And we want to structure our feedback on those points. Will there be other things that we want to provide feedback on? Yes. And maybe if we've been working with our students on, effectively utilizing transition words in their writing, if that's appropriate, we want to, provide them feedback on that, but we don't want to provide it on all the things. Stick to your rubric and then anything else that you've been, really giving students some additional practice on. We're so well intentioned when we, grade our student writing responses, but we can tend to give them information overload and it's just not helpful for our students. So we're going to end our list today with one of the most impactful pedagogical moves, building student efficacy. When students are able to recognize where they are in their learning and what they need to do to improve, their confidence and their motivation are going to increase. Providing students with resources like these can help them recognize the steps in their learning journey, how to get to the next step, and also understand that they should be proud of themselves and their growth as a learner. So looking at this example here, we see the 1-star, they state an idea about the characters. Okay, so they've done something. So recognize that. But then, we see that as students are moving up into, 2 stars and 3 stars and 4 stars, they see, okay, well, to get a 1-star, this is what I need to do. So this might be where I am now, but I don't want to stay there. I want to grow. So this strategy right here, this anchor chart, I really love it because it gives students the expectation. So they need to support the idea with evidence. Well, then they give them some mentors of what that looks like. And then to get started for students who need that additional support, it gives them something to get started with. So this is starting to build that inner drive to improve and to keep moving forward and to grow their skills as learners. And building that I think all of us can agree that's not easy to do, but we need to give students lots of practice and lots of opportunities to do that. And we'll see some of our students that they're going to really surprise us whenever we start doing these practices. So the next part of our session today is going to take a look at the lesson study protocol. And this is a protocol meant to help facilitate the infusion of the pedagogical moves within our HQIM. So our first session that we did in this learning series, we looked at the unit study protocol. So that's kind of the unit as a whole. What's going on in this unit? What is the learning? What are the knowledge and skills my students should learn as they're going throughout the unit? What are the texts that we're reading? What knowledge are students building with this text? Where might my students struggle? So we're looking at the bigger picture of the unit. So before you begin your unit, you'll complete that unit study protocol to trace that learning throughout the unit. But once you've unpacked the unit, you've got to get into planning at the lesson level using student data and your knowledge of pedagogy. So we have a protocol for that analysis and looking at those lessons a little bit deeper. and that's our lesson study protocol. This is something that was developed for ELA guidebooks. However, it's not specific to guidebooks. This is something that can be used with any ELA curriculum. It actually works really well with our social studies curriculum as well, any of those HQIM resources. So step one of the lesson study protocol, we're going to look at that unit study tool. Hey, we did the work to fill that out and we got some really good information there. We need to reevaluate the connection between the overall unit knowledge and skill demands and then our lesson look-fors. So as we dive into individual lessons, we can begin to focus on specific areas of need based on our own classes of students. In order to meet the needs of every child, we should annotate our lessons by determining the purpose of the lessons, those activities, and the questions. Reading, creating your own exemplar responses to serve as student look-fors, identifying possible student misconceptions, developing additional questions for just-in-time supports based on student look-fors and anticipated student misconceptions. We've identified those in our unit study tool. We need to kind of bring that knowledge over into our lessons. We also need to identify the timing and grouping adjustments. We looked at that example earlier of the annotated lesson plan, and we saw how the teacher made some adjustments there. We also need to identify optional activities to include and whether or not the additional small group support is needed and how it's going to fit into our lesson. And then the final step of the lesson study protocol is understanding that our materials matter. You need to identify which materials are needed for each of your lessons, and then be sure to provide access to those materials. You'll want to determine a procedure and explicit directions for the distribution of materials to minimize those disruptions of instructional time. There's nothing worse than not having a material you need in a place where you need it in the middle of your lesson. That would always happen to me. If that was going to happen, it was going to happen when there was someone in my room observing the learning happening. And you just, we're doing a disservice to our students when we don't have all those things ready to go and where they should be. Should also create and display any sort of anchor charts or additional classroom visuals that are going to support the lesson. And then you want to secure the technology needed for students to complete the lesson. I know most of our schools are one-to-one devices. So if students need their Chromebooks or they need their computer for this particular lesson for any part of it, we want to be sure that we have those out and available. And then we want to, if we were in person, we would do this activity a little bit different. But we're going to take a look at the lesson study protocol exemplar that was completed for Hatchet. It's one of the new 6-8 units. And we want to look at it and kind of consider the following question. Where is there evidence of best teaching practices, including supporting and engaging all students in this lesson? So let's take a look at this. And of course, my Google wants to go slow now. That's okay. It's thinking, make this a little bigger so we can see it easier. All right, so we have this lesson study protocol, and we have filled out, we've got our planning notes we've started filling out. We've identified the knowledge the students are going to build in this lesson, and then the skills that are being built. We see our planning notes here. We've looked at each and every activity, and this is an example from guidebooks, but this is applicable to any curriculum. Looking at each of those activities in the lesson to see what is the purpose of those. And then we created, or we read the exemplar responses that are provided within the curriculum. And then see there's a from activity 9. And the teacher even identified here that they're going to pick this up at the end of the lesson to check for student understanding. So this is going to be like their exit ticket. And this is a claim that they are, is kind of the exemplar of what their students should be able to produce, something similar. And then identified some example evidence that possibly students could select. Here, they've identified possible misconceptions, and we'll look at, I think it's not in this example. Oh, here it is. It is. I knew it was here. But the pre-work. So activity 4, they've identified some, they're going to do some choral reading in here, which we looked at the beginning of the session, and then added some additional notes for the teacher, talk about conflict and theme are present in most literary stories. And then they're going to show some examples from the previous unit that they completed. And then activity 5 has students reading a text that it talks about patty, but it just says the word patty. And so our students, they might not know that that's talking about a rice patty. They might think patty, oh, hamburger patty, and they're going to miss the whole point of the story. They're going to really not be able to get what they need to get from reading that text. So, have a picture of a rice patty. There are some words that are important for students to understand the text, but these aren't words that necessarily we need to spend a lot of time going into a vocabulary protocol to deep dive into these words, but students need to know what they mean. So the teacher said they're going to have those vocabulary words and the definitions posted. So patty, avail, pertinacious, because as a 7th or 6th grader, they probably wouldn't know that word. Behoove, another word. We don't use that often. So we want to be sure that our students know what these words mean as they're reading the text. But then there are some words, a quick little vocabulary protocol that the teacher is going to use for some of these, but just a quick protocol, nothing like super deep diving into the background of these words or anything of that nature. And then we see throughout each activity, the teacher has really been very intentional as they've gone through the lesson to identify exactly what additional materials they may need, such as the picture of the rice patty, what additional questions they're going to ask. They've really internalized this lesson, and they're ready for their students to learn. We also see the materials matter. So the teacher, they're identifying what materials they're going to need. And then she's identified there's going to be some differences in these activities. And so she needs to go ahead and make those slides and be prepared. And then have guided questions for activity 9 on small slips of paper to give out to their pairs. So if we're doing our lesson planning, the week before, it's important for us to make these notes, because what we may have thought about to do in this lesson that's coming up next week, a lot of things are going to happen between when we're planning and the day before we're doing this lesson. So having this to refer back to is very helpful, so we don't get caught in those instances where, oh, we meant to do something and we're not prepared to do it. All right. So when making instructional decisions and annotating your lesson plans, we want you to think about your lesson goals and success criteria, engagement strategies and best teaching practices, the best place to provide support for the factors uncovered in your data when you analyze your most recent assessment data, and then how support should be implemented and what pacing considerations need to be made. And then we want to infuse our plan with good pedagogy and execute that plan. As you get new data, you have to make new instructional decisions. This is a cycle of support. So once we do the unit study, we're anticipating student needs based off of the data that we have at that time of our students. As we go through the unit, we're getting new data. Therefore, our instructional decisions need to change to align with that new data. It's a cycle, and it indicates those that new data tells us those new instructional decisions. And then as students progress through the unit, we need to track their progress to see how the supports are meeting our students' needs. When you get new data and it indicates an area of need, we don't shut everything down and do an entire lesson on this topic. Instead, we provide the supports where it makes the most sense. We have several resources to support you in your planning that we've talked about. Today we have, and these are just some additional ones besides what we've talked about, the diverse learners for ELA guidebooks, the independent reading protocols, and then some supports that you can use and share with your teaching partners. Some good practices for annotating text, using rubrics. I'm going to put these links in the chat. I apologize. I'm flying solo today. So I'm trying to do two things at once and not doing a good job of it. So I apologize. Annotating a text, using rubrics, creating a claim, reading and writing for a purpose. These are some wonderful tools that could help all teachers. If you plan with, which you should be planning with your special education teacher or an inclusion teacher or the speech teacher, there should be some opportunities for collaboration. And these are some resources that could support both of you as you're going through instruction. Part 3 of our learning series is going to take place on March 12th. And we have the registration link. I'll put that in the chat as well. And I apologize about us having to change the date for this session. It was supposed to be last week, and we had quite a few people registered, and I hated to have to move it. I was sick and out of the office, and I was not able to do this session. So I do apologize for that. And I'm glad you were able to join us today. We're going to have a recording of this session. We'll have it posted on the K-12 ELA planning page on Louisiana Believes. And I hope that you'll join us for our third session in March as we wrap up our learning series. And if you have questions about anything that we've talked about today, I know you may have been in transit, heading home at the end of a long day, or you might not have been able to grab a link to a resource. Please feel free to reach out. Or if you just want more information about something we talked about today, just send us an email, elaguidebooks@la.gov. That goes directly to my inbox and my team's inboxes. And we are always happy to support our educators as they're doing the amazing work to support our students. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. All right, I am going